Hello, welcome everyone. This video is for Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra, verse 107. And this is a bit of a milestone actually, because now we are exactly two-thirds of the way through the overall text of the Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra. So it's about, depending on the version you look at, it's either 161 verses, 162 verses. So with verse 107, we're two-thirds of the way through this amazing scripture. And there's about 30 yuktis left to go. A yukti is a technique. So a parallel term, a synonymous term is dharana. And dharana can mean something like concentration, as it does in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, but a dharana can also be a centering technique in Tantric Yoga. The meaning is broader and looser than in Patanjali. So centering technique. And then yukti just means a technique. Any yogic technique really is a yukti. And indeed, the word yukti is cognate with yoga. So they both come from the same root, the same verbal root, yuj, right? And now, so yuj, everybody says that means to unite, and it does, but it also means to use, to employ. So the word yoga and its various close synonyms like upayoga and yukti and so on, these words mean a method or a use, right, or a technique, as well as having these other meanings, this other kind of constellation of meanings around union or connecting or joining. So a verbal root like yuj is actually very complex in the Sanskrit language. There's only a few hundred verbal roots that go all the way back to the beginning of the language and have these incredibly detailed and complex clusters of meanings, right? So by which I mean that there's maybe a dozen different domains of meaning within which there's maybe a dozen each terms that could translate the word yoga or upayoga or yukti. So anyway, that's just my estimation off the top of my head. But if you look up, yuj in the Sanskrit dictionary, you find many meanings that are derived from that root, many more than you've heard of. So this is one of the fun challenges of the Sanskrit language, is just this kind of amazing semantic range that some of the words have. But it's not arbitrary. Okay, so it's not true that the word can mean whatever you want it to mean, and that's a problem in modern spiritual culture, especially from the point of view of a scholar of these traditions and a linguist. Nothing makes us cringe more than these people who go around at festivals and interview folks and say, "What does Tantra mean to you?" Or "What does yoga mean to you?" As if to imply everyone can just make up their own definition and it's perfectly valid. Now, from the point of view of a scholar of traditions and of language, that is extremely cringeworthy. But now I've gone off on multiple tangents right at the beginning of the video, so I'm going to rein myself in, as I often have to do, and we'll look at this verse in particular. So, once again, Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra, verse 107, which is yukti number 83. Now, that's in my numbering. There's different ways to enumerate the yuktis or techniques of the text, and I don't want to get into a discussion of that right now. But ultimately, the text itself says there's 112 yuktis, 112 techniques. But how you number them, how you understand what the text is trying to do, varies from translator to translator. So I just think it's important to note this is Yukti number 83, only in mind numbering. Not, it's going to contrast with others. But we all agree that it's verse 107. And here's the verse. Svavad anyaśarīre'pi saṃvittim anubhāvayet apekṣāṃ svaśarīrasya tyaktvā vyāpī dinair bhavet. Do that last verse quarter again. Tyaktvā vyāpī dinair bhavet. Traditionally, if you make a mistake, however small in recitation, you simply do it again. Okay, so that verse means cultivate the felt sense that the consciousness in another's body is the same as one's own. Letting go of dependence on one's body, one experiences all-pervasiveness within days. So let's break that down. Word by word. Anubhāvayet in Sanskrit. One should or one may cultivate the felt sense. This is a wonderful verb in Sanskrit we don't have in English. Anubhu can mean experience, but it can also mean cultivate the sense or the felt sense. So that one word is translated as cultivate the felt sense. Anubhāvayet, cultivate the felt sense. That the saṃvittim, the consciousness or awareness in someone else's body, in someone else's form, anyaśarīre', is the same as one's own, svavad. Okay, so svavad anyaśarīre'pi saṃvittim anubhāvayet. Cultivate the felt sense that the consciousness in another's body is the same as one's own. This little particle pi just means also. The consciousness in another's body is the same as one's own. That was a fly. That was a fly deciding I'm going to park my butt right on the camera, computer camera. Okay, so then it says, and we'll break this down more, but now we're just getting the word by word. Apekṣāṃ svaśarīrasya tyaktvā. Letting go of dependence on one's own body. Vyāpī dinair bhavet. One becomes all-pervasive within a matter of days. Okay, this assumes that the practice is more or less constant, that you become obsessed for a short time with this contemplation, and then in a matter of days, it says the contemplation will bear fruit. Okay? So this is sort of presuming, somebody whose spiritual practice is more or less a full-time affair. Now that doesn't preclude being a householder, because, as many of you already know, you can perform micro-meditations and cultivate awareness and do contemplations even while you're going about kind of everyday life. And that's part of the tantric path. But also, sometimes it's important to just really dive into a practice and do it a lot, whether it's a contemplation or a practice. If you take a couple days, a few days to really dive into it and keep coming back to it over and over and over again, That can be a beneficial obsession. Okay, so now let's get into the meaning of the verse a little bit more. Okay, so in Western discourse, in the English language, but not only the English language, in European languages generally, in Western discourse generally, there is a significant confusion between mind and consciousness. So when people talk about, in the West, about evolution of consciousness, they're really talking about something like evolution of cultural understanding or evolution of mind in some way. Because consciousness per se doesn't evolve, it can't evolve, because consciousness is simply the power by virtue of which there is experience, any experience whatsoever. Consciousness is the fact of experiencing. It's the fact that there is such a thing as subjectivity, whether it's contracted or expanded. Still, it's the fact of subjectivity, the fact of direct experience. That's consciousness or awareness. We can use those terms interchangeably, even though some don't. But consciousness is often confused with mind in Western discourse, even in Western philosophy. So mind is cognitive function. Mind is thinking, or perceiving, or having various kinds of cognitive function. But all of that happens within the context of consciousness, which is the power by which anything whatsoever is known, or sensed, or felt, or perceived. Okay? So, the reason I'm talking about this is because this is what prevents people from understanding the teaching in this verse, that the consciousness in another's body is the same as one's own. Because we think, well, that person's having a very different experience, so how can you say the consciousness in their body, in their form, is the same as mine? Well, because we're talking about a more fundamental level than most people ever bother to perceive. Okay? So let's put it this way. You've got a body-mind. You've got a body-mind complex. Right? And this is very important. Again, this is where Eastern philosophy completely diverges from the get-go from Cartesian philosophy, Western philosophy, that posits a kind of difference between the body and mind, some kind of like that the mind is some kind of ghost in the machine. It's the exact opposite in Indian philosophy and Asian philosophy generally. In fact, the mind and the body are inseparable, and indeed they're not two things that are connected, they're actually one thing, which precisely corresponds to modern scientific and neurological understanding. A way to put this simply is the mind is the subtlest aspect of the body, and the body is the most tangible expression of the mind. So it's a continuum or a spectrum, whichever term you prefer. So it's a body-mind, okay? And it's consciousness itself that's something distinct. It's consciousness itself that cannot be explained with reference to solely neurological function and biological function. Right? So let me put it in more spiritual language, which is also more intuitive and easy to understand for those who do, which is awareness is that which is looking through your eyes right now. Awareness is that which is looking through your body-mind. So the body-mind is the vehicle of awareness or consciousness. And when we are focused on the body-mind state, which could be confusion, it could be mental, emotional turmoil, it could be mental, emotional, it could be positive affective states, it could be any number of things. But when we identify consciousness with that which it is looking through, then it seems to be colored, as it were, by that which it is looking through. So in other words, if the body-mind is in a confused state or a distressed state, then we wrongly imagine that consciousness itself is distressed. So this is why we meditate. Only through meditation, through pausing, through slowing down, through taking a careful look at things, can we discern that consciousness itself is not altered by the changing states of the vehicle that it's looking through, the embodiment piece, right? So as one of my teachers put it so beautifully, when the mind is confused, consciousness is perfectly clear about the fact that there is confusion. When the body is sleepy, consciousness is awake to the fact that the body is sleepy. And 100 other examples, see? So when you are able to really carefully examine your experience, you see there's an aspect of your being that we're calling consciousness here that is not tainted, if that's the word, by the various experiences of the body-mind. Colored would be closer to the Sanskrit language usage, that the consciousness is not actually colored by the body-mind state, even if it appears to be. And it's said in the same way that if you take a clear quartz crystal, this is a traditional example, if you take a clear crystal and you hold it up to a colored cloth, well, that clear crystal appears as if it's a red crystal, if the cloth is red, or a blue crystal, if the cloth is blue. But in fact, it's never altered in any way. It just appears that way, right? So then you look at the crystal on its own, oh, it's perfectly clear, and it always was. It never changed. I just thought it changed. So in this way, we need to get clear on what consciousness is. Right? It's the power of awareness. It's that which is looking through your eyes right now. It's that which is aware of the arising and subsiding of thought. Right? It's that which is aware of the arising and subsiding of emotion. And if you really take a look at it, as it were, you see that awareness itself simply holds space for the arising of whatever arises. It never resists what is, no matter how strange or even distressing the body-mind state is that's moving through. Awareness itself never resists and also never grabs onto whatever the changing body-mind state is. It simply holds space for it. And it seems to be neutral space. But as you continue to meditate, as you go deeper in your practice, you discover this astounding thing, totally unpredictable, and certainly, doesn't seem to make sense scientifically why this should be the case. But as you go deeper into the nature of consciousness itself, it turns out that it's not simply neutral, holding space, that there's this very, very subtle willingness to be with what is, intrinsic to consciousness itself. It's not a feature of body, it's not a feature of mind, but intrinsic to consciousness itself. There's this subtle willingness to be with what is that we might almost call love. Dangerous word. So misinterpreted, so misunderstood. So we might hesitate to call it that, because this willingness to be with what is such a quiet, quiet kind of love that it's almost unrecognizable, or is unrecognizable, as having anything to do with the sentiments of the Hallmark cards, or of romantic songs and literature, right? Perhaps nothing to do with them, perhaps only a tenuous link. One could argue about that. But anyway, the point is that consciousness, when seen in its real nature, is not in fact neutral. Some say the right name for the quality, the intrinsic quality of consciousness, would be a kind of quiet joy rather than love. But I think that boils down to kind of how one experiences it on the basis of one's conditioning. Because even though consciousness itself transcends all conditioning and is prior to it, when we come to apply words, that then conditioning is involved, right? So, in the live feed, Heather asks, what does resist or grab on? Just the mind, the body-mind. Remember, it's all one thing. The mind resists its own states. That's the irony, right? The mind can be like a person flagellating themselves, beating themselves, right? Or coddling themselves. The mind resists or grabs onto its own mental emotional states. The heart mind, really, because it's all of it together. The heart mind resists or grabs onto its own mental emotional states. Okay, so got to wrap this up. Cultivate. But we could also translate orient to the experience that the consciousness in another's body is the same as one's own, or cultivate the felt sense that the consciousness in another's body is the same as one's own. So in other words, the body-mind of each human has a unique configuration. We are like snowflakes, actually, in both ways, meaning to say each snowflake is literally unique. It's an absolutely unique geometric configuration, and yet all the snowflakes are made of water, one and the same thing. So it's a great analogy. They're all water, and yet they're uniquely configured. In the same way, we are all the one. We are all the one being, the one being that has the universe for its body, God, if you want to call it that. And yet each body-mind is uniquely configured. So consciousness is looking through your eyes right now, and that which it's looking through is different from you to me. That's why the words you and me don't lose their validity in a non-dual view. That which consciousness is looking through is different, but the consciousness looking through the body-mind is the same. It's the same in you, it's the same in me. And it plays this game of confusing itself with its vehicle, that which it's looking through, and then freeing itself from that confusion. This is something we'll need to explore in more depth at another time. So finally, the verse says, letting go of dependence on one's body. What does this mean? Well, it's a little bit of a theme, it's a micro theme in this text, that you shouldn't be more concerned with your own body than with the body of, say, the earth. That yes, you should be concerned with your own body, but not more so than you are concerned with the body of the earth and with other bodies, the bodies of other conscious creatures, right? Because your body, what you call my body, is actually not yours any more than anything else's. So there's this teaching to let go of apekṣāṃ, kind of dependence on one's own body, self-concern, one might say. But that doesn't mean not caring about anything. That means realizing that your body should be cared for as the earth should be cared for, as the bodies of all conscious creatures within reason and within possibility should be cared for. And by the way, in this tradition, we talk about ambit of concern, meaning to say, in modern culture, we have internet and we have videos of things happening all around the world and horrible ways people or animals are being treated. But and that's important. I'm not denying the importance of that. But also, ambit of concern means caring for those creatures within your sphere, the ones you can actually reach physically, the ones you might be able to help within your ambit, because otherwise it's overwhelming, right? Nobody can do that. So if you follow this practice of cultivating the felt sense that the consciousness in another's body is the same as one's own, and let go of dependence on one's body, obsessive self-concern, then you could experience this vyāpī state, this all-pervasiveness. I am everywhere. Literally, I am everywhere. Not a thought, but a direct experience. Om. See you next time. Now I'm going to do a Patreon live webinar, and it's because of the patrons on Patreon that all these free videos on the VVT exist at all. And we're at about 100 VVT videos. We have about a year, another year to go, almost a year, before the text is complete. All made possible by the support of the patrons on Patreon. So thank you very much. Take care.